Hello and welcome. My name is Vladislav Novikov. My guest today is Uriel Epstein, CEO of the Renew Democracy Initiative. Uriel, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with Trump's last diplomacy angle. Trump says he wants to bring in the Turkish president to help settle the war between Russia and Ukraine. Why do you think he's turning to Turkey for that?
Well, I think that Trump is grasping at straws. The truth is that Trump truly believed, I actually now believe that he genuinely thought he could end this war in 24 hours. Now, I think he believed this in part because he was misled by Russian propaganda and so forth, which for whatever reason he appears all too willing to believe. But I think there's an element of just that kind of arrogance of he and only he alone could solve anything. And so he comes into office. It is now well over 100 days into Trump's second term, and needless to say, he has not managed to resolve this war. Furthermore, it appears that the willingness of this American administration to actually negotiate and demonstrate the force and commitment necessary so that Putin understands that America is serious and that he's not just going to be able to do whatever he wants and continue this war indefinitely. It's, I think, pretty clear to me that this administration is unwilling to do that, which means that he's turning to Erdogan as a last line of defense. He's looking for anyone who can kind of resolve this. And Turkey plays a very unique role in the region because Turkey, on the one hand, is a member of NATO. Turkey has worked to ally itself with the West, but at the same time, Turkey is a borderline dictatorial regime, right? Erdogan is at this point not really a democratic president. He's someone who has implemented any number of authoritarian policies. And he's also someone who he's someone who believes that he must equally work with Russia, China, other countries in the East, not to mention, the fact that he's displayed certain Islamist tendencies. So Turkey finds itself in the middle, and Turkey's playing both sides, where on the one hand, Turkey has supported Ukraine, but on the other hand, Turkey has also been willing to work with and collaborate with Russia. So Turkey is kind of uniquely positioned to play a mediation role. But I think the fact that Trump has turned to Erdogan, who, again, I should note, is not a democratic leader at this point, to try to resolve this conflict smacks of a certain kind of desperation. It smacks of the fact that Trump has been unable to resolve this. And I should note that Turkey's role is not new. I mean, Turkey has played whether a formal or informal mediation role since the beginning of this war. So the fact that Trump is only now kind of discovering the role that Turkey might play, once again, I think speaks to the fact that he really is not an expert in this conflict. And incidentally, I think his key negotiator, Steve Witkoff, is also not an expert in this conflict. And I think this is really starting to show.
Mm-hmm. And sticking with that idea, do you think Trump's move to bring Erdogan into the picture could work better than previous efforts?
Well, as I mentioned, Erdogan has already been in the picture. I mean, to say that Trump is bringing him into the picture implies that Turkey has not already been involved, when in reality, Turkey's been pretty involved now for a couple of years. So I'll be honest, I do not expect a different result now that Trump has officially and formally brought in Turkey versus, I guess, what was Turkey's informal, unofficial role over the last couple of years. And of course, I mean that somewhat sarcastically. Turkey has been very, very involved, and I think Trump's recent actions are more symbolic than they are substantive.
Mm-hmm. And on the China front, Xi is visiting Russia soon. And do you think this could be part of a push to end the war, maybe with China pressuring Putin?
No, I don't think so. I'm not sure that it's in China's interest for this war to end. The longer that this war goes on, the greater China's ability to pressure Taiwan while the attention of the free world is diverted to Eastern Europe. And I believe that the likelihood of a conflict in Taiwan is increasing dramatically. In fact, I would go so far as to say that I think that the likelihood of some kind of conflict in and around Taiwan over the course of the next 2 to 3 years is at roughly 50%. And the longer the war in Ukraine drags on, the higher the likelihood that such a conflict actually transpires. So, do I think Xi Jinping is interested in pressuring Putin to end the war? No. I'm not. I'll be honest. I don't know why. He's in Russia. I'm not privy to the private conversations between the two dictators. But I would imagine it could very well have something to do with economic partnership. I could imagine it could have something to do with mutual military support or other such things. But in truth, you do see a partnership between China and Russia, in which Russia is the junior partner, China is the senior partner, and I don't see that partnership going anywhere. And I don't really see China playing a positive role in Russia's war against Ukraine.
You're right, but we know China has a big economic problem because of the trade war. And building on that, if Xi somehow gets Putin to back down, do you think the US could ease tariffs on China in return?
Well, number one, again, like I said, I don't think that it's in China's interest for Putin to back down. So I don't think that's what China's going to be doing.
But it's important
I hope I'm
for
wrong.
Trump.
Yes, it's important for Trump, but I don't think China's top priority is doing whatever's important for Trump. We're talking about the trade war with China. Again, America is going to be hurt by this just as much as China. Note that while Trump has increased tariffs significantly on China, he has also issued so many exemptions that the most important goods that are traded between America and China, things like the iPhone, things like auto parts, and other such things that are critical to American industry, Trump has offered an exemption for those goods. Which is to say that some of the tariffs that he has, levied against China are kind of in theory more than in practice, because again, there's so many of these exceptions. Do I think China is in a rush to offer Trump concessions in return for Trump's, lowering those tariffs? Again, I do think there are negotiations between the two countries. I do not think that China is going to, prioritize doing whatever Trump wants as one of its top things. Therefore, do I think it's a factor in China's conversations with Putin? Maybe, but I would put the likelihood of that as being fairly low. I just think that Xi Jinping has a number of other priorities with Russia that are more important than essentially trying to give Trump something in return for Trump bringing tariffs down.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk about Trump's reaction to the ceasefire. Trump now calls Putin a 3-day ceasefire a big win. But earlier, the White House was clearly unhappy and said that not what they expect. Why such a shift in tone?
Maybe they received a phone call from somewhere. I don't know. I think Trump is someone who doesn't like to be perceived as losing, right? I mean, well, nobody likes to be perceived as losing, but Trump especially, someone with his ego, with his self-regard, and with his posturing as this strong man, he cannot be perceived as having lost, as having failed. Therefore, he will take anything as evidence of a victory. This, incidentally, was one of my biggest fears when I first heard about Putin's so-called ceasefire. What I was afraid of was that Trump would point to this and say, look, we succeeded. There you go. That's it. We're good. We're done. We're out of here. And that's what I'm kind of afraid may happen, is that, Trump is going to look at one of these things and say, oh, look, Putin made some kind of concession. Terrific. now, we can all go home and, that's it. We're done. And then the war, of course, will continue, but Trump will have washed his hands of it. And to some extent, I'm afraid that that's perhaps what we are starting to see. Right? I mean, you've seen Trump talk about how he's going to pull out, how America is no longer interested in this conflict, how this is not his war, this is Joe Biden's war. He has made any number of statements indicating that he does not want to take responsibility for what happens, and that anything he can do to claim a victory is something that will allow him to save face while still essentially abandoning Ukraine. So again, let's see what happens over the course of the next week. But I would be deeply concerned if Trump truly believes that this so-called ceasefire was a strategic victory for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some suspect there is more going on behind the scene. Maybe Putin promised Trump something behind the scene. That's why Trump seems happy about the ceasefire. But why does he still trust Putin at all?
That is the million-dollar question. Why does President Trump trust Vladimir Putin? I don't know. Is it possible that Putin promised him something? It's possible. Again, we're not going to know. But the truth is that we have seen consistently for the last roughly decade plus that Trump has a certain sympathy for dictators, right? I mean, we've seen this where he went from calling Kim Jong-un his enemy. He called him Little Rocket Man. He said that, his nuclear button was bigger than Kim Jong-un's nuclear button, to suddenly calling Kim Jong-un one of his best friends and talking about how much they love each other and so forth. And with Putin, the only difference is that Trump never claimed to hate Putin. In fact, Trump has attacked almost every foreign leader in the world except Putin. I have almost never heard Trump say anything negative about Putin. The closest I think we've come was when, last week Trump said, "Stop Vladimir." Again, as though that were the epitome of American foreign policy. And I actually reacted on social media and said that entire interaction reminded me of an episode from Veep, which is this American comedy show about an American vice president. And the whole point is it's supposed to skewer the American political system because there's all these ridiculous and insane situations. But again, seeing an American president's reaction to the Russian dictator killing countless Ukrainians, and his reaction is just to say, "Stop Vladimir." I mean, unfortunately and tragically, that is reminiscent of a dark comedy show. So again, why does he trust Putin? Well, I think number one, he has a certain affinity for dictators. I think number two, there's something in Trump's long history with Russia that makes him particularly enamored of Moscow and of Putin, perhaps because Putin is able to do the things that Trump wishes he could do, or it could be any number of other things. But it's clear that there's a relationship there in some way, shape, or form. And I should note that some of the people around Trump are kind of parroting the Russian propagandistic line. Tucker Carlson has the president's ear. And, we all remember the propaganda trip that Carlson took to Moscow, where apparently he was simply amazed at the incredible Russian supermarket where you could put a quarter and, or put a ruble and get a shopping cart. Just incredible. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene, who parrots Russia Today. You have any number of members of Trump's cabinet, actually, who have made appearances on Russia Today, on Sputnik, on other Russian propaganda channels. In fact, right now, Trump's nominee for the district attorney for D.C., a very important role, actually made appearances on Sputnik. So again, these are people that Trump is promoting. So there's clear that there's an affinity here. And ultimately, my final point is I would just say that however many billions that Putin has spent on propaganda targeting America, unfortunately, they were billions very well spent.
Okay, now turning to Europe. Poland's president said Trump has seen reality and could push tougher sanctions to force Russia to the table. Do you think that could still work?
Well, I mean, the first question is the president of Poland's perception of Trump correct? And look, I think that he is the leader of a sovereign nation, and therefore he is doing his job. He is saying the things he needs to say in order to try to push Trump in the right direction. So the fact that he said that Trump has seen reality and could push tougher sanctions, I'm not sure that that's actually his honest assessment of where the American president is. I think that's a tactic. He's saying that in order to try to push Trump in the right direction. And I'm happy he's doing that. And, I think we've seen that can potentially work. And so again, do I believe that Trump will actually do that? The truth is no, I don't. I think it's more likely than not that Trump will not suddenly push tougher sanctions against Russia, because again, every piece of evidence that I have seen coming out of this administration, and not only the administration, but also Trump's other statements that are separate from this administration, has indicated that he, as you asked me earlier, that there's an element of trust there, that he, for some reason, trusts Putin. And again, the most famous instance of this was all the way back in 2018, when in a press conference in Helsinki, Putin said that he was not involved in American elections, that there was no Russian meddling. And despite the fact that all 17 of America's intelligence agencies said that, yes, we believe that Russia meddled in our elections, Trump said, well, I take Putin at his word. I believe him, which means that he believes a dictator over his own intelligence agencies. And I think that's pretty telling. So again, number one, I don't think it's very likely that Trump will put in sanctions. I don't think it's impossible. I just think it's unlikely. If it's possible, if he does end up, putting in additional sanctions on Russia, do I think they could work? Well, I think it define the word work, right? What does it mean for sanctions to work? If the sanctions are sufficiently powerful, if they include secondary sanctions on countries that allow others to bypass current sanctions, right? That means secondary sanctions mean that basically any country through which goods can come into Russia would in turn be sanctioned if they allow that to happen. I think that would be necessary to do, because right now, we have sanctions on Russian on goods coming into Russia, and what happens is that those goods will then go through Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan or some other country. So we need to implement sanctions that prevent that from happening. And Trump, to his credit, I suppose, did highlight specifically the possibility of secondary sanctions. So that's number one, is we'd have to do secondary sanctions. Number two is we would have to further tighten sanctions on Russian oil and gas. And then number three, we would have to do, basically close out any possible sanctions related to Russian financing, which could include, again, the confiscation of Russian state assets in Europe. Trump loves pressuring Europe. He loves attacking Europe. Well, here's an opportunity for him to pressure Europe. He should tell Europe that they have to confiscate the nearly $300 billion in Russian state assets that are sitting in European banks, the majority of it sitting in Belgium. All he has to do, basically pressure European leaders to confiscate that money, give it to Ukraine so that Ukraine can use it to further purchase American weapons in this war against Russia. That's a perfect win-win. And it does not cost either American taxpayers or European taxpayers a single penny. So there are a lot of sanctions that Trump could leverage in order to pressure Russia and limit its ability to continue this war. So the key question is, does he have the political will to implement them?
Uriel, thank you. And thank you everyone who watching this video. Uriel, see you next time.